Hello and welcome to Viewpoint. It's been a significant week for Gibraltar with less than a month to go before the treaty's implementation. We can see the physical frontier being dismantled and businesses have finally received the certainty they've been asking for. The updated residency rules, Cat 2 status and further customs guidance for traders. On tonight's programme, we hear from the Minister for Business, Gemma Arias-Vasquez, and the Shadow Minister for Business, Craig Sacarello. They join us in part 2 of tonight's programme. But first, let's hear from representative bodies. The Gibraltar Federation of Small Businesses Chair Owen Smith. Good evening.
Good evening.
We also have the President of the Chamber of Commerce, John Isola, and I'm pleased to also welcome back Luis Montegriffo, Managing Director of BMI Group, after having provided us with some insight on the measures on Viewpoint last month.
Good evening.
Welcome back. Thank you. There's an awful lot to digest, so I'm just going to ask you for your general thoughts of everything that's been announced this week. What particular stands out for you? Shall we start with Owen?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of information has entered the public domain this week, which is very welcome. Only a very short period of time to go before the implementation of the treaty. Certainly our members will have been sort of scrambling over the last 24 hours to read through that documentation and try and get to grips with it, to understand how and if it impacts their business. The item that really stands out for me, because it's an issue that has really risen to prominence amongst our membership over the last few weeks. And it's risen to prominence, I think, because we are seeing our members getting more accustomed to what the transaction tax means in practice, and also there is more guidance entering the public domain. So people are getting more comfortable with that, whereas residency has been quiet for 9 months. And that is an issue, I think, that many of our members have been watching carefully, looking out for this announcement, and it's definitely the one that caught my eye this week.
OK, John?
Yeah, I think it's very welcome. We're less than a month away from the date, and I think one can compare what we're going through today with what was happening prior to the opening of the frontier. I think there's excitement, but there's also nervousness and concern. And there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done by different businesses. And it's very, very challenging, and especially as we come into what is the high tourist season. So I think it's exciting, but it's going to be challenging.
OK, Luis?
Yeah, I'd echo with what John has just said. From my perspective, I'm probably here more to look at and analyse a little bit more about the Cat 2 status and the residency, where we've had obviously a pause now since October. That's obviously from our point of view, yes, been a concern, but pleased to see the announcement and some of the detail that's come through. I think some of which we did discuss in that last Viewpoint programme, and a lot of which actually has come through. So pleased to see that now finally it's there. We understand it. From my perspective, I think there's a great deal of protection to a degree insofar as residency and who can and can't come into Gibraltar or can aspire to come into Gibraltar, etc. It's important that we focus on that, because the reality is that the agreement and residency, or what residency in Gibraltar will provide, is quite substantial, particularly, if you like, for UK nationals. I think we've got to be careful with volumes, potentially, of people who may be attracted to that, and how we manage that from the point of view of the many benefits that we've enjoyed in Gibraltar, might it be education, healthcare, etc., and how that can continue to grow as we've enjoyed it, whilst at the same time also growing Gibraltar with new residents and business. Yeah,
hence the new rules.
Yep.
So it's interesting because we talk about the uncertainty of the last 8 months since the pause was put on residency criteria. Actually, it's been 10 years of uncertainty. It's actually, I think next week is the 10-year anniversary of Brexit. So it really has been a very challenging 10 years for Gibraltar in terms of business. But it seems, you know, we are finally seeing the light. But as John says, there's still quite a long way to go. You've actually got implementation. Let's start with the new residency policy. So it's 55 years or under, with the potential for the Chief Minister to have discretionary decisions on that. You also have a starting salary of $37,500, but we also know that there is a waiver for companies who do want to bring in young talent, as long as they pay the tax and social security for the threshold figure, they can pay a lesser salary. How does that sit with you? Is that the right balance?
I mean, you've referenced 10 years of uncertainty, and I think that's right. It's been more, the business proposition in Gibraltar has been uncertain, and uncertainty is the enemy of business. I think that the best policy for residency or any other policy is one that is can be delivered by reference to a set of objective criteria and not by reference to a large exercise of discretion. And I think that one of the points that emerges to me from the residency policy is that there are many areas where the policy indicates that it will be for discretion to be exercised.
But doesn't there need to be that flexibility, though?
Of what?
Of discretion.
Well, I think there has to be a balance. I think everyone understands what the government is, what they are aiming to achieve in part with this policy, which is to balance fiscal constraints of residents accessing the multitude of benefits that residency brings you in Gibraltar against the cost of delivering those services. But the challenge that businesses have in Gibraltar, and this is part of the reason why this is an issue that has risen to such prominence over the last few months. Recruitment is a challenge in Gibraltar. That is what businesses day-to-day experience. And it is particularly, I think it's going to be becoming more challenging with this criteria, which the government itself admits is stricter than what we used to have. It's going to become more challenging. And there are going to be many, many people who fall outside the objective criteria for residency that this paper sets out. So there's going to be many people that do not meet the earnings threshold. That average earnings threshold is high. It's not an average earning threshold in the private sector. It's far higher than that.
What is the average earnings?
I mean, I've tried to work that out from the statistics that are available, and as far as I can identify, that's not a published statistic. It's certainly not in the most recent employment survey. But I would say that is by an order of thousands, more than 10,000 higher than the average salary in the private sector. I'm not sure really even why an average salary is an appropriate metric against which to assess whether or not somebody should be qualified for residency or not, because, of course, there are many high earners in Gibraltar, many high earners, particularly in the public sector, rather than the private sector. So it doesn't really give a fair indication of the number of people who earn beneath that threshold, of which there are thousands and thousands and thousands, and many of them are people who will need to apply for work permits and residency in Gibraltar, who are British nationals in particular, are going to be affected by this criteria because their options to live elsewhere are reduced as compared to an EU citizen. And I think that is going to be a big challenge because we have a very large service sector in Gibraltar. That service sector is UK facing. English as a first language is an important aspect of that. Our legal system is English. Our education system is English. Our healthcare system is based on the English system. All of these things, I think, are of a real concern to our members who always struggle to recruit, but particularly in the last 9 months have struggled because we have been in a period where more discretion rather than less has been exercised. And I think...
Is there a particular sector where you have complaints from your members insofar as recruitment?
I sat on a panel last week, and that panel... the audience of that panel was a range of businesses across all sectors in Gibraltar. Our very largest employers, such as gaming companies, insurance, legal, financial, and the absolute smallest businesses as well. People who are recruiting electricians and drivers, cooks, staff for their kitchens, staff serving staff, and they're recruiting junior lawyers, junior accountants, senior lawyers, or more senior lawyers even. Many of whom would fall foul of this 37.
But
threshold.
as long as they pay the social insurance and tax for the threshold, the 37,500, they should be okay. But the question is, unlike big gaming companies, would they be able to afford that?
I mean, I think we've had this for 24 hours. There's a lot of discussion to be had about that. We haven't really had an opportunity to have these discussions with the government. So, to be fair to them, we need to have that discussion and to understand the thinking, understand their concerns, which are behind this, which we don't have access to all of that information.
That's what we've said in our statement today. We don't know the detail of what's forced this.
But broadly speaking, would you agree with what Owen has just said, that the threshold is too high for the private sector?
Well, there's a particular category of people, and that is British nationals wanting to work in Gibraltar, who fall below that threshold, who will find it very difficult to get a job, and that means that we will not be able to recruit British nationals in retail, in hospitality, and so on.
If you earn too much below that threshold, you probably wouldn't even be able to afford to live in Gibraltar.
Correct,
would you?
and that is why I think there is a gap in the treaty, in the sense that the treaty does not cover that. There is no mechanism in the treaty whereby a British national who manages to secure a job in Gibraltar can apply for a visa to reside in Spain.
Which is generally a non-EU.
Non-EU.
I think it's an interesting point as well, because obviously there's this theory is that we will push people to reside in Spain and then they'll come and work here in Gibraltar. And, I question what impact that will have on our local economy as well, because frankly, if people are being paid in Gibraltar, we would like them to spend their money here too. We would like them to live here. Businesses would like them to live here and go to our restaurants and go to our events and spend money in our shops and so on.
I don't think anybody really knows what the effect of this, of these residency rules are going to be. Nobody can determine or predict the future, and I think they're designed to protect public services, and I think rightly so. And hopefully there is enough flexibility within those rules to be able to adjust them depending on the demand and how the economy. I don't think it's ideal to leave things to the discretion of a minister, I have to say. It is far better to have rules that the public service can...
Or an independent body, maybe, rather than one individual.
Precisely. I think that would be much better.
I think it's the exercise of discretion which is of concern, because whilst that on paper is perfectly reasonable, in practice, the experience is that any exercise of discretion takes time. And when you're competing for employees, you risk losing them. And that is precisely the experience of our members. And this was really, really brought to my attention last week in this panel about the number of people who are saying we are trying. Fairness is, of course, very important. It's not necessarily absent from the exercise of discretion, but it does take time to exercise that discretion. Ministers are very, very busy people. And last week, businesses were talking about, we are trying to bring people to Gibraltar, and we can't tell them that we can give them the job because this application is pending, that application is pending, and they will go elsewhere, and they do go elsewhere.
Let's hear from Lewis.
Yeah, I can't disagree with what Owen has just said. I think what seems to be the focus on the residency rules is really very much about protecting what we've currently got. Whilst at the same time, I appreciate what Owen has said, in that we might be deterring people from coming, and we might, in the same vein, have companies in Gibraltar which won't be attracted to coming to Gibraltar because of the very fact that they've got these constraints. I think time will tell. I think fundamentally the government has had to look at this maybe from a wider scope, insofar as what that residency card gives the residency card holder. And I think there's quite a bit there, and therefore I would suspect that there are going to be potentially a lot of applicants who would like to come to Gibraltar, not necessarily just normal residents, but also Cat 2s, etc., who find the proposition of what we're offering quite substantial and quite interesting. And I think it's uncertain to see what volumes we may have, but I think the preference might be to have some constraints and some protections to better understand what it is that we've got. I mean, my view is that we've got something quite special. We need to protect it. We need to make sure that we grow it sensibly, as opposed to potentially opening the lever, so to speak, dramatically and finding lots of people coming over, which we're then stuck with insofar as having to look after.
And don't forget that as I think either slightly before or after the agreement was announced, there were certain entities promoting come and reside in
Absolutely.
Gibraltar, you will get free movement within
Absolutely.
Europe and all these benefits,
Yeah.
education, etc. So, you know, that didn't.
Yeah, and
help.
that's why the government moved to change the
And just
criteria.
going back to a comment you made before, insofar as when this all started, which was the uncertainty beginning June 2016, it's been uncertain. But oddly enough, over the past 10 years, from my perspective anyway, we've seen the economy grow. We've seen property prices generally grow. We haven't really seen any sort of crashes from that perspective, other than the dip we've had between 2022 and 25, which really was driven by uncertainty, but also just a worldwide crisis that we had as well. So
Yeah.
it was almost like a realignment. So we've seen growth.
To be fair, yes, absolutely right. But obviously, you don't deal with imports
No,
and exports,
completely
which is
different.
where
And-
the issue is, really.
And I
isn't
think
it?
that whilst the economy has grown, it has to be said that there have been certain sectors that have not necessarily grown. Don't forget that we had COVID in the middle of the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And we haven't really, if you think about how Spain's tourist numbers have shot up since COVID, ours haven't. And that has an effect. And I think the treaty is going to help to cure that, in a sense, because there's been a lot of talk about don't come to Gibraltar because you don't know what document you're going to get and be asked for and what queue you're going to end up with and so on and so forth. That once that clears, hopefully we'll be able to attract more people. But we need to make sure that people that come here get a good experience here.
Okay, there's a lot to talk about the customs guidance updates. We're not going to go into all the technical details, but what's important is to understand whether you feel that there's enough clarity and whether you feel that it's workable. But before we do leave residency, I do want to touch on the Cat 2, Lewis, because a statement today has finally clarified what we were talking about a few months last month, in that the new threshold for a Cat 2 is now 5 million of net wealth. The first thing I want to bring up with you, Lewis, that you're probably aware of, is that you did say that you thought it would be investable, but that's not actually the case.
Yeah, actually, well, I mean, I'm surprised to an extent. I mean, obviously, 2 million to 5 million is substantial, but actually, in the context of the clients that we bring in, probably not very significant. And I would have thought that potentially they would have made it investable as opposed to net worth. Anyone can be worth 5 million on the basis that they have a property in the UK worth 4.5 million, for example.
Might that not make it more unattractive? Don't forget we are competing, obviously, with other jurisdictions.
I think it makes it unattractive or attractive. I think ultimately the scope for attracting these individuals becomes a little bit wider because it's easier to attain, as opposed to having, saying, well, I need to have a look at your bank account to make sure you've got £5 million worth of money is in there and ready to invest, not in Gibraltar, but readily available. So it makes it easier. So I don't see, to be honest, with the Cat 2s, I don't see a dramatic change other than the increase from 2 to 5 million.
They don't have the right to be resident in Gibraltar,
What we don't know yet is whether the tax they pay is going to increase from the current, I think, 40,000, whether that's going to increase. Now, whether it's 60, 80, 100,000, I don't think that either is very significant from the point of view of what the client, what the prospective Cat 2 is going to get, insofar as residency in Gibraltar and what he enjoys, particularly UK nationals, but also, as we've had historically, Cat 2 high-value clients coming from other European countries where they are taxed pretty highly and they're looking for jurisdictions like Gibraltar.
I will put that to the Minister when we have her on part 2, whether there's any tax increase planned. But the other change, as I mentioned, is that they don't automatically have the right to continue to be resident in Gibraltar. Is that going to be, do you think, is that going to disincentivise anyone from choosing Gibraltar?
Well, you talk a bit about, Owen mentioned the word fairness before. Currently, you have Cat 2s who are Cat 2s in Gib, and for whatever reason their status or changes, and they just normally, they can come and say, actually, we don't want to be Cat 2 anymore, but we just want to enjoy the fact that we love Gibraltar, we like spending time here, it's become our home, and actually our income now is no longer from a business, it's actually a pension, which they wouldn't pay tax on. That, obviously, with the new rules, will change, and therefore, I think what it reads as saying is if you're not Cat 2, you've got to leave. So I don't know how that's going to play, whether it becomes attractive or not. I think ultimately the Cat 2 that comes to Gibraltar is coming for a particular reason. We hope, as has been the case consistently over the past 25 years, that these Cat 2s initially would come as Cat 2s, not particularly spend too much time in Gibraltar, not particularly spend too much money, But over the years, we've seen more and more of them love Gibraltar and make Gibraltar their home. And I think ultimately, from that perspective, we'd like to see that to remain being the case. And I think the way Gibraltar has evolved over that period of time, we're seeing more and more of that happen.
OK, well, let me put a question to John and Owen on the subject of Cat 2s, and then we're going to move on. And that is, apart from buying expensive property in Gibraltar, and have we seen a lot of Cat 2s don't actually reside in Gibraltar? You know, they fulfil the criteria, but they don't actually...
That used to be, if I can just say, that used to very much be the case many years ago. I have to say that the majority of the Cat 2s that I deal with do spend time in Gibraltar, some more than others, but particularly I would say that we've seen recently a lot more, many more Cat 2s make Gibraltar their home and actually enjoy Gibraltar.
Well, in that case, you know, my question was, how much do they contribute to the economy?
I mean, I think the focus of our members is on the whole range of residency measures that have been announced. They're quite wide-ranging. Changes at the top, changes at the bottom, changes to long-term residency. And I think that it will be very important for us to understand the overall modelling of how this is going to impact our economy, because it really is going to have an impact on people coming here to work, people who stop working here and start businesses, people who come here for one reason and decide that Gibraltar is the place they want to stay. All of that, which we have enjoyed the benefits of, certainly since, I think, at least really since the gaming industry landed in Gibraltar in the late 90s. Gibraltar's a completely different place to what it was before that happened. And it's been very good for Gibraltar. And I really hope that the modelling shows that that sort of incremental change in what the makeup of our community and the employees, workers, entrepreneurs and so on that come here, love Gibraltar and want to stay, can continue easily. And I think that's extremely important. And, you know, it's not just talks about residency, it's also talks about people who want to start businesses in Gibraltar, again, imposing some fairly significant thresholds there. And I would really very much like to understand, as would our membership, the modelling that's been done on how those, you know, the long-term effects of these sorts of changes.
OK. I'm making a note of that because I want to ask the Minister. OK. And I want to ask you about the customs guidance. We're going to switch to the customs guidance. And also I'd like to pick up on some of the measures that the Minister mentioned in her speech at the GFSB dinner the other night. Quite a lot of measures mentioned there. But first of all, the customs, I mean, this was the biggest thing, wasn't it? Businesses were unclear about what forms, where they had to clear customs, all that sort of stuff. Does this clarify? I mean, I know it's a lot to digest.
It goes a long way. Remember, what was announced yesterday was mainly to do with customs warehouses. There'd already been information in terms of the standard importation processes and the requirements for ORI. And I have to say that certainly, as far as the Chamber is concerned, the conversations that we are having with customs are very, very fluid, and it's a moving exercise. You know, they are also finding out things as they go along, and it's very fluid between customs in Gibraltar and the customs in Spain, and to us as well. And I think that's how it has to be, and I would stress that it has to be that way also in the transition period. I think it is very, very important that there is an element of tolerance and flexibility post the 15th of July, because there's going to be issues, and we have to have flexibility if there's not going to be disruption. OK. One
of the things GFSB has mentioned isn't just more certainty and clarity as to the processes that will begin after the treaty is implemented. But the other thing you mentioned repeatedly was financial support for businesses. I noticed in the Minister's speech there's the appointment of a state aid expert. Do you think that's hinted towards finding a way that the government can support businesses without breaching rules?
I mean, it's understandable state aid is a hugely complex area, and Gibraltar is now effectively bound by those rules. So if there is going to be any form of direct financial assistance, it must comply with those rules, and it makes sense that the government will take the necessary advice it needs in order to implement those systems. Certainly, some of our members are very much at the sharp end of the Brexit wedge. They are the businesses that are paying the transaction tax. For many people, many employees and consumers and so on may feel the impact, but they're not paying it up front. And if you're in the service industry or your business is in the service industry, you're not paying it up front, but some businesses are, and those businesses do need direct financial assistance, which is compliant with state aid rules. So we very much hope that when this gentleman gets his feet on the ground, that will be his first order of business.
Minister also did point towards the budget. So don't know what's going to be announced, but are you hopeful that perhaps there might be some financial measure announced?
I hope so. I know that me and John have discussed this extensively. It's both of our organisations are very keen to see this.
But I think it's important that existing businesses should be assisted in understanding how to model the future of their businesses, and that the assistance that they receive should be towards arriving at a business model that is sustainable in the long term. And some business models that exist today may not be sustainable, so they need to make that transition, and that is where they need assistance. And it's very, very difficult to come up with something that ticks all the boxes in that regard.
Right. Well, in part two, we have got the opposition shadow Minister for Business and the Minister for Business herself. So if I were to ask you to round up by putting to the Minister or the opposition MP, but what question would you want answered? That's what I'd like you to round up. You can also encompass a little bit of your thoughts, but if I can just ask you, what question would you put to the Minister?
Well, I'm going to steal the question maybe from Owen.
Don't steal my question.
Potentially, what might have been your question, I think you've mentioned it on a few occasions, what their business model is moving forward based on the, I think, I'm not going to say dramatic changes because they aren't that dramatic, but they are, there are obviously nuances in the residency rules, etc. Obviously, the agreement is, and the impact of it is substantial. And what their business model and focus is based on that, and how that will then apply to, in particular, I think, retail sectors, etc., and how they may have to look towards changing their own business models, and what we may find as new customers, new profiles, new clients coming in, what their expectations might be based on what we now have to offer.
Okay.
Precisely.
John?
I agree, and this is something that we've asked for. Even if we get it in confidence, we would very much like to see the modelling they have done on best, mid and worst case scenario in terms of transaction tax and excise collection over the next 5 years. Because if they've done that, that would be very good guidance for us to know what they're expecting in terms of the direction of the economy in certain sectors, which is hugely important when it comes to conceiving assistance for our members and how they make that transition and how they change their business models to the new environment.
OK, Owen, you're not allowed to have that question now. It's been taken from you by two people, so you have to give us another one.
Well, I don't think I would have a single question. I think if we had some FaceTime with the Minister, as we regularly do, then it would definitely be a conversation about the underlying thinking about some of these changes, particularly in respect of residency, and an opportunity to voice our concerns and the concerns of our members.
I've certainly put the issues that you raised and the concerns you raised about the threshold to the Minister when we have her.
I think if I had to ask a single question, it would be, because a lot of this is, we've designed a treaty that gives frontier fluidity for the benefit, it was often said, of the number of businesses that come to Gibraltar to enjoy that lifestyle, that cross-border lifestyle. So that fluidity was very important. A lot of them gaming sector, a lot of them employing UK nationals. And I would like to understand, if I had a single question, what the evidence of that surge in demand is today.
You mean the 3,000?
Well, this is all. Some of these restrictions, they are based on the expectation that there will be a surge in demand for residency in Gibraltar, and I would like to understand what the evidence today is. What is the government looking at? How many people are breaking down the door and saying we must come to Gibraltar?
Okay.
Again, this would inform it. It's like the modelling. it would inform the way that we respond to these policies, because a lot of this information, we don't necessarily have access to it. And if you were to say to me, there's 100,000 people applying for residency, my approach, my views on this would completely change.
Sure. OK. Well, thank you very much. I will certainly put all those points to the Minister when she joins us with Craig Sacarello in part 2 of the programme. Lewis, John and Owen, thank you very much for joining us. And hopefully we'll speak to you once the treaty is implemented and we'll see how things are going. Thank you very much. Join me again in just a few moments when I will have the Minister for Business and her opposite, Craig Sacarello, joining me on Viewpoint. Hello and welcome back to Viewpoint. Well, we heard from some stakeholders in part 1 about some of the issues of concern they have, but broadly they welcomed many of the measures announced this week, which include the customs guidance, the residency rules and the cat status, updated cat status rules. I now have with me in the studio the Minister for Business, Gemma Arias-Vasquez, and the opposition MP, the Shadow Minister for Business, Craig Sacarello. Thank you very much. And you have been listening to the debate in the Green Room. So I'll be asking both of you about some of the issues that were raised in part 1. But first of all, I would just like to ask you, first of all, it's been a very significant week for Gibraltar business. It feels as though we've, after months and months, well, 10 years of certainty and certainly 8 months of pausing on the whole residency, it feels like we finally moved forward this week.
Yeah, as you say, 10 years after the Brexit referendum, it feels slightly unreal. I was actually looking at photos a while ago of exactly how young I was at the Brexit referendum, and it was quite disheartening. So 10 years after the Brexit referendum, we are now entering into a new chapter. So we now have a treaty, we now have the certainty of a treaty, and it's a very much anticipated development in Gibraltar. So we are now moving into implementation, which is a hugely exciting period, but it's also hugely nerve-wracking because with that comes some changes. So this week, we've brought in some significant guidance. As was announced in the GFSP dinner, the guidance notes are now out there for businesses. We've now issued several guidance notes for them to know what exactly they will need to do by the 15th of July. We've also confirmed that there will be beautification of Main Street, Casemates and Chatham to improve the place where business happens as well. We've also confirmed that we'll be investing in CCTV for the security of Main Street. But of course, most of the discussion just now centred on the new residency criteria that was announced yesterday. We believe that the criteria bring some certainty with it. So we now know the rules. We've now told businesses the rules. We've now told stakeholders what those rules are, and we've tried to balance that. We've tried to balance the public services and securing the public services that we have in Gibraltar with a pro-business approach. Now, we don't realise how special what we have in Gibraltar is, and I see one of your guests actually use the word special. It really is. We have a health service that produces great results. We have an education system which actually offers an awful lot to our students, and we have many other benefits which people from abroad do want to come into Gibraltar to enjoy. And we want to be clear, we want people to come into Gibraltar. We want people to come and work in Gibraltar and live in Gibraltar, but we need those people to contribute in a fair way to the system. So what these rules try to do is that they try to implement a fairness into the system so that, yes, you can move, you can enjoy Gibraltar, but you are contributing to the economy. And finally, there was one announcement which was barely touched on, which was a consultation on a new Business Act, which is also a hugely exciting development, because I think it's important to say that I was on the other side. So 8 years ago, I would have been sat in your previous panel as chair of the GFSB, And I heard a lot of what the issues were in the GFSB, and I hope that the new Business Act will address a lot of the concerns that businesses have.
Yeah, as always with Viewpoint, we never have quite enough time to go over everything. Thanks very much. We will definitely go back into some of those points that you've just mentioned with some questions to raise that the panellists, previous panel raised. But first of all, Mr. Sacarello, I'd like to ask you, a lot happening this week. How do you receive all the information that has been put into the public domain?
Thank you, Ros, for inviting me on. And yes, there is a lot of information out there. But I'd first like to highlight the importance of the small business community and small businesses to Gibraltar, not just its culture, but the financial side. Not only do they pay the wages of the owners of the businesses and their families, not only do they pay the wages of the employees and their families, which constitute thousands and thousands of livelihoods, it's important to note, but they contribute 30% to the economy. That is a significant economic lever which is channeled into public services, which is channeled into the GHA, which Gemma's just mentioned, the education, civil service, etc., etc. And I think that during this deal, the government's line has always been to prioritise the flow of movement of people across the border, particularly for the services sector. And so the poorer relation has always been business. And when you couple that with the fact that the negotiation of the treaty, which had been highly complex, negotiated at a very high politico-legal level, has had to put to one side the commercial and procedural difficulties that would be encumbered as a result of it. So I think that it's important to know that I've recently spoke to various different people across the sectors, and they are very, very worried about the mammoth task ahead. There remains a lot of uncertainty, procedural uncertainties, commercial uncertainty, and legal uncertainties.
Even with the guidance that's been published?
Even with the guidance, yeah. They do not believe that there's been full consultation and that the town halls to come will necessarily cover all of it. And it is the government's unequivocal responsibility to ensure that present businesses, apart from the future economy, that present businesses are allowed to survive, to adapt, and to grow as businesses.
OK, so Mr. Sacarello mentioned the town hall meetings. There are 2 town hall meetings on Monday to address some of the issues and bring some clarity into the pharmaceutical and the bonded warehouse elements of the treaty. But first of all, I'd like to ask you to respond to Mr. Sacarello's criticism that there's just not enough information out there. Not enough consultation.
I'm going to distill some of those points. So, yes, government has been prioritising the free flow of people into Gibraltar. The free flow of people into Gibraltar is fundamental for those small businesses that Mr. Sacarello refers to. The free flow of people is what brings people from across the frontier into those businesses. The majority of shop assistants, the majority of employees that work at these small businesses are cross-frontier workers. So when you speak to businesses, businesses are understandably nervous. Whenever there's a change, business will always be nervous. Everybody will be nervous of the change because we don't know what the change will bring. The alternative to the treaty was a non-negotiated outcome where there would be less people coming into Gibraltar, there would be less flow of people to come into work in Gibraltar, and that was untenable for Gibraltar. I think the Chamber and the GFSB have accepted that numerous times over. So yes, we were prioritising the flow of people, but it's not prioritising the flow of people for big business. It's prioritising the flow of people for Gibraltar. Gibraltar needed that free-flowing frontier, and we recognise that that was a priority. So that is the first point that I would make on that. Secondly, on consultation, we have had, the town halls announced today are town halls on specific sectors. As you correctly say, they're on special customs procedures, which is the bonded warehouses, and on pharmaceuticals and medicinal products, etc. So they're very sector-specific town halls. We'll have further town halls with the GFSB and the Chamber. But these aren't the first that we've had. So we've had already a series of town halls with the sector where everybody was invited to attend. And it's important to say that myself, the Attorney General, and Customs, where they have been relevant, have not left the table until there was not a single question left to be answered. So we answered all of the questions that came our way. There is a document on the treaty website, which is a frequently asked questions document, which answers a lot of the detailed questions that we've received. And tomorrow, the second draft of frequently asked questions that are far more specific will go online as well. So we are doing as much as we can to try and answer all of the questions that they have.
I have to say, and I have to put it to you, it's a jolly good thing that the treaty implementation got delayed from the 10th of April to the 15th of July, because it seems that more information has come out in this period than the previous period.
I'm really grateful that you've asked that question, because actually the information isn't for us to provide of our own accord. We have to engage with our counterparts, right? So what has been happening is that there's an ongoing process of engagement, and the engagement hasn't been there until recently. So the documents haven't been coming through. This is not us not wanting to provide the information. We have been trying to provide the information, and we have been providing all the information we have as it has become available to us. This is a process where we need to come to certainty, but with a counterpart. It's not, if the information were ours to give and it was solely within our control, the information would have been in the public domain a lot earlier. However, it is a process, and it is a process which we've had to come through with our counterparts, making sure that everyone is on board with the documentation that we are providing.
Okay.
Which is evidence, proof that commerce and procedural measures have played second fiddle in all of these negotiations. There are almost an afterthought. Here we are at the 11th hour, on the verge of the second start date of the implementation. And there are still huge amounts of questions that are unanswered. In our view, consultation isn't sporadic meetings with certain business owners. It's not a town hall or simply just a town hall meeting where some questions are asked and people go away and come back to them via emails. Consultation is a sustained sector-wide exercise where concerns are absorbed, expert advice is consulted, and months in advance answers are produced and solutions are found and communicated in a simple, clear, simple way via a document that is sector specific. With 3 weeks to go, I very much doubt that will happen.
I'm not going to enter into this debate. It is a live document. They are documents that are being agreed to on a on-course basis. What Mr. Sacarello is talking, Craig. What Craig is, Craig can actually go back a long way. What Craig is talking about is not realistic in the context of what we are negotiating. We are negotiating we have negotiated a groundbreaking treaty that has all these requirements that need to come into force.
Okay, I think we gathered that, and I think I'd like to leave that political argument to rest and move on to address some of the key points that were raised by the panel before. One of the things let's start with the new residency rules, because they came out yesterday and they have been much long awaited for. We heard the GFSB chair say that the minimum threshold of 37,500 is just far too high for the private sector. Do you accept that? And why was that figure arrived at? How was it arrived at?
So the figure is arrived at because a figure had to be arrived at. A figure had to be arrived at, and that figure is the gross annual earnings as per the annual as the employment survey. So that is the figure that was chosen as a fair figure. Now, in order to address some of Owen's concerns, there are discretions, but the discretion isn't going to be applied on a case-by-case basis. So if a specific sector comes to us, as indeed they already have, and says this doesn't apply for these reasons and it's accepted, then it's not a person-by-person discretion. It's a sector-wide discretion that the Chief Minister will be able to accept on a sector basis. So the delays that he's talking about won't necessarily be there, because once the discretion is exercised for a sector, it will be implemented for that sector.
Okay, but initially there will be some delay whilst the government exercises its discretion for that particular sector.
So we actually don't see the delay, and some of the arguments in relation to modelling and stuff and how we came to the conclusion that we came to. Remember that we are the people that are receiving the applications, that are receiving the information that are. So when the treaty was announced, we saw the huge influx in applications for residency in Gibraltar that was already happening. So the moment that the treaty was announced, or the moment that it was thought that we were going to have a treaty, the number of applications for residency in Gibraltar increased significantly. And as a government, we have a duty to protect our public services and to make sure that we have a robust system that we can deal with the.
Okay, you mentioned the 37,500 was the average earning, but
Yes.
as I've mentioned to you, Owen Smith said that is about £10,000 higher than the average earnings in the private sector. So how is the private sector, and I'm not talking about big companies, and please do jump in as well, Mr. Sacarello. I'm not talking about the big gaming companies, smaller companies, smaller private companies that, the bread and butter of the private sector. How are they going to be able to bring in, because recruitment, he said, has always been a struggle, and this is going to make it harder. Do you accept that?
I think that there's now the certainty in place. I think that, like with every new regime, that we will start seeing if it works. If it doesn't work, we think it will work. So age 30 and under, there is a discretion there so that the employer can apply in order to enable people
For
that
the
are
individual discretion?
No. So everyone under the age of 30, the employer can pay the top up for PAYE and social insurance, and they can be employed on a lesser salary than 37,500.
Yes, but that's fine for a large company. I'm talking about the smaller companies.
But even the smaller companies. So remember that we have a very generous social insurance regime. So the social insurance there's not a huge difference between the sum that's going to be paid under the 20, if they're being paid, for example, 22,000, or they're paid 37,000. So we don't think that that'll have a huge impact. So anyone under the age of 30, the employer can opt to pay them less, and they can top up the PAYE and social insurance. So that takes out a lot of trainees, a lot of apprentices, etc., that somebody might want to employ, including bar staff, front of house, etc. There is always the option as well, which has always existed, of cross-frontier workers. So a cross-frontier worker can live in La Linea, or live in the surrounding area, and work in Gibraltar. And work in Gibraltar has always been accepted as proof of earnings for their applications for residency.
So Ros, I'd like to first state that we, as a GSD, do sympathise with the whole exercise of reviewing the residency status, given the potential deluge. But as Owen said, we've not really seen any empirical evidence to back that up at this stage. But one thing that I would say is that anything that makes any government policy that makes it overly burdensome or bureaucratic or time delayed or difficult to makes it impossible to source from a certain demographic will have a chilling effect on the economy. And what that means in the long run is that we have less for public services. So one area of concern, which Gemma's already touched upon, is, and in fact you asked, was the under 30s. Notwithstanding
The under
fact,
37,500. The threshold, the salary, is that what you mean?
Yes, but for under 30-year-olds, there's a discretion where they can pay a top up. I actually think that in the light of, in the absence of any empirical evidence to say the contrary, I actually think that it will have an impact on recruitments within the economy, because companies will prefer to save £3,500 or £3,000, which it will be per individual per year. If you multiply that over a whole customer services team, that's quite a lot of money at the end of the day. And so, and I accept that there may be sectoral exemptions, but there are also other issues. For example, in the UK, France, countries like that, for under 26s, they apply a 70% reduction. So if your entry level minimum is 37.5, that 70% reduction, like as in the UK, for under 26-year-olds would be 26,250. So Owen, on the one hand, is saying that the salary level is too high, but even if we accept that as a reasonable level, and he's explained the reasons why it is set too high, because it doesn't reflect private sector pay, average pay, is that your under 26s, you'd be able to recruit in at 26,200, which is far more reasonable and likely to happen. And one other thing which is interesting to note is that at any given time we have about 900 Gibraltarian students studying abroad, mainly in the UK, and many of them will come back with partners, boyfriends or girlfriends, and they will likely want to bring their partners back. Now, if their partners don't work in one of these exempted sectors, they're going to have to do pretty well to convince someone to either pay them £37,500 and above, or that they're worth that extra £3,500 a year. And I think that ought to be given consideration too, because what we don't want is the people we've invested in remaining in the UK for emotional reasons.
I don't know whether Mr. Sacarello, whether Craig has had a chance to actually read the document, because in the document itself there is an exemption for Gibraltarians that come back with partners, and Gibraltarians that come back with partners. So anyone that has a Gibraltarian status that brings back a partner.
What's a partner? A boyfriend or a fiancé?
It's a partner.
It's 2 years, though, isn't it? They have to be going out for 2 years.
They have to give evidence that they've given. You have to bear in mind that we have to be cautious of loopholes as well. So we have to have a certain degree of certainty, but if you're in university, so you'll likely have a partner for a certain degree of time. So there is a specific exemption there for that particular scenario. So we don't think that that's going to be an issue, because any Gibraltarian that wants to come back with a partner will have an exemption and doesn't necessarily have to comply with the £37,500. So an in-depth look of the document. We have done a lot of work. We have done a lot of research. And indeed, Ros, your viewpoint a couple of weeks ago shows that the consultation was so widespread that everyone actually knew roughly what the criteria was going to be.
Indeed.
So I think that the exemption is there and it deals with that. If I can deal with the other point.
Yeah.
So what Craig is saying is that you can pay students £26,500, you can pay trainees. You can actually pay trainees £22,000, you can pay trainees £17,000 under the exception that we are currently applying. All the employer has to do is top it up. So what we're saying is actually more lenient than what Craig is saying. What we're saying is you can pay your trainee whatever you want.
I think the point Mr. Sacarello was making, if this is correct, is that it's going to cost the employer a lot more.
It's not going to cost. So we've actually worked out the sums, and it's not going to cost the employer a lot more. So Owen actually mentioned also, partners wanted to come over, or senior lawyers wanted to come over. Senior lawyers earn more than £37,500. So I think that there is a sector-specific issue that we have to look at, and it's trainees. I think it's a younger generation, and it's also a lot of people that work in very specific sectors. So the bar sector, the retail sector, and young accountants and young lawyers. So there will be sector-specific exemptions, but we do have to see how that falls, and we do have to see empirically, to use a word, whether people have an issue or whether the exemption for under 30-year-olds is sufficient or otherwise.
So the government will have some degree of flexibility going forward, depending on feedback.
I understand that Owen doesn't like the discretion in the legislation. Yes. The discretion is necessary in order to give us that flexibility, and the flexibility is sector by sector, not individual by individual.
Okay.
Could I just ask
before we move on?
Yeah,
yes,
just very quickly on that question of exemption, Gemma. Will the government be coming up with, once the cabinet has met and decided on what regulation? I don't know if it'll be passed as regulation. Will that be published so that people can see? No, I presume. I'm just saying. Or will it remain? Nebulous?
It always surprises me when the opposition thinks that that this is shooting from the hip, that we haven't. So an awful lot of work has gone into this criteria.
Well,
the regulations.
It's not me being surprised. It's people asking.
I was going to put that question to you. Yeah.
So the regulations that back this policy are in the throes of being finalised. The government law officers have actually worked very, very hard on this. All the relevant heads of department have actually been involved in the consultation internally as well. So the regulations which back this, which look to the different pieces of legislation, the Immigration Act, there's an awful lot of legislation that underpins this policy, and the regulations that underpin this will come out. Of course, the sector-specific discretions will be published. So it'll be known, especially to the sectors concerned,
When?
that there is
it will be published.
We'll say what the discretions are.
Okay.
Sorry.
I have 3 questions to ask you, and it's all to do with modelling and evidence. The first one is, Owen Smith said, what evidence do you have that there will be a surge in demand for residency in Gibraltar? The second thing was what evidence that the measures that you've announced will take Gibraltar in the economic direction that you would like it. And the third one, talking about evidence, is the Chief Minister did say that there was a study done by EY and that would be published. That hasn't been published yet. When is that happening? So it's all about evidence, please, Minister.
Of course. The evidence of the surge we saw when the treaty was announced. So when the political agreement was announced, there was a huge surge in applications. So the evidence is already there. And if you think about what residency in Gibraltar will bring, residency in Gibraltar will actually be hugely attractive. We can see people that want to apply. You can look online. The evidence from stakeholders show that there will be a huge surge in applications. So the evidence came when the political agreement was announced. It wasn't even the treaty and the treaty document itself being announced. It was when the political agreement was announced.
OK, that deals with the numbers of people.
Yes.
Let's talk about the measures that you've
So the measures
decided.
are very specifically set to protect the GHA, to protect the education department and to protect our public service. So it's all about fairness.
But what about the economy? That's it.
So-
Where is it going to take the economy?
So what we're saying to business is, by all means, and what we're saying to people is, by all means, come and live with us. We want you to come and live with us, but just contribute. So we are putting in place mechanisms behind the scenes so that we can see the contributions, so that we can see the contributions are being met. So that for us, it's very, very important that people are contributing. We are saying to businesses, we are open to listening to you, to bring people in.
I actually think that it sends out a different message. I think it does have a chilling effect, particularly at the younger entrants. I mean, the people who come into the business at a young age are the future middle and senior managers. And if we're not able to recruit, particularly businesses that are UK-facing and wish to have British staff there, if we're penalising them for no reason, really, because they're not exactly a drain on the GHA or even education when they're 20-odd years old.
We're not, sorry, can I just work on that? We're not penalising anyone. We're encouraging it whilst trying to protect the public
Okay,
services.
Minister,
But there is an additional charge to them compared with people who live over the border. For
So when we look at our services, when we look at, I mean, you can talk to any teacher, you could talk to the hospital staff, and you can see that there is a surge in people that are looking to come into our services. So we do, as Gibraltarians, we also have to protect that. So it's a very fine balancing act. We want businesses to be able to bring in their people, and if businesses have a huge issue with any particular provision, we're doing it by way of regulations.
I'm going to push forward this final question. There are other issues to bring up. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I have to ask you, what the businesses are asking for is evidence. What studies have been done? Let's move away from the point that we're just talking about now. What evidence that the measures will have a positive economic effect going down the road?
So
what studies have been done?
The studies are, so there was an EY study that was done at the point of Brexit. That is with the Chief Minister, and when the Chief Minister decides to release it, he will release it. But that was a specific study that was done on the Gibraltar economy, not necessarily on the residence piece. On the residence piece, it's a very difficult balancing act, because what we're saying here is Gibraltarians won't be affected by these new rules, but anyone coming in will have to contribute. So again, the message is very clear. We want businesses to employ. We want people to come over. Sorry, if I can just finish what I'm saying. We want businesses to feel that they have the certainty of knowing who they can employ or otherwise. If there's an issue, we have discretions that enable us to look at those issues. But we have to set a parameter somewhere. Yeah. So what we've done is that we've set the parameters that we think are fair to protect our public services whilst encouraging a pro-business approach.
Okay.
I just think it's
final comment.
It's highly remarkable that since October the 6th, which I believe was when the freeze happened, that there's been no a formal study to back their evidence and also to back their measures taken. I mean, it just seems that it's just been done with discussion between a few people.
So I think
Do you want that to be your last comment?
My last comment on the whole evening?
On the whole, I'm afraid.
No, of course not. I'm afraid.
And then I'll let the Minister respond. Your final thoughts. We haven't been able to cover everything, unfortunately. It's gone remarkably fast.
I know. I'd just like to come back to the businesses and the challenges they face. The pharmaceutical sector in particular is facing serious challenges with supply of certain products such as shakes for elderly people who are unable to eat solid, powdered milk, etc. These are really raw and serious issues, not just within that sector, but other sectors, around importation, about registration, about issues with pitfalls that companies could fall into without realising just by remaining on the Astengo. I was hoping to bring that up this evening, but we haven't had time. And I think it's incumbent on the government to really dig deeply, really consult sector-wide, because these issues are live and could have a very negative effect, and it's really important.
Have you been proactive yourself, Mr. Sacarello?
Yes, I have, exactly. In speaking to people across different sectors. It's very different. We're not in government, so we can't generate a sector-wide consultation. It is a different, but I have been busy speaking to lots of people across different sectors and lots of people within the sector. Just one other thing, a little anecdote to mention. We met with some retailers, I think it was last week, and they said for the first time, this is a fourth and fifth generation, well, both people, there were several people there, but two people said that they had fourth and fifth generation businesses. And for the first time, they were considering recommending their kids didn't take this up. These were retailers. They are seriously under the cosh. And it would be a shame. They're part of the fabric of our society, and it would be a shame for that to happen. Okay. And everything must be done to ensure that these businesses
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, it feels like you have two questioners here, but you are the Minister and you are responsible ultimately. So yes. I'll let you just respond to any points you want.
I think it's very easy to sit on the other side and to issue one question in Parliament every so often on this. Another thing is to come up with concrete guidance and actually help guide businesses through a treaty transition. I think that what we're trying to do as a government is we've given businesses the platform through the new treaty. We've given businesses the certainty of what Gibraltar can look like in the face of the alternative, which was a non-negotiated outcome. Now we are taking businesses through all the guidance notes, and we can receive criticism that it's too late, we are working full throttle to try and deliver to businesses the guidance notes that they need, the beautification of Main Street that they need, the certainty that they need. Customs have set up a treaty implementation committee, which will take a lot of businesses through the Astengo systems, through the forms, to the business that is at the end. There will be little difference in the way that they interact with customs through the forms. There is an online procedure. We have said that the forms and the procedures will be online soon. We are doing our utmost to take businesses through this transition period. And again, Mr. Craig's job is to criticise what we're doing, but what we're doing is remarkable. Sorry, Craig, I didn't interrupt you. What we're doing is remarkable in the face of a treaty which is groundbreaking. We are now trying to take everyone through it. And of course businesses are nervous. And of course we will do everything in our power to take business through that transition period and issue all the guidance that they need. But it's not having a coffee in business with some mates. It's actually going through the detail of the treaty and going through what businesses need. It's taking businesses through town halls, waiting for all the questions that they have, receiving all their FAQs and answering all their FAQs. So I believe that we are trying to do everything possible at a pace whilst we are negotiating the admin arrangements and everything else in order to deliver the certainty at the point in time that we need it. So it's a very difficult job, but we really are working full throttle to try and deliver it.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you also, Craig Sacarello, for coming in. There is so much to talk about, and I'm sorry that you haven't had enough time to talk about all the issues that you do want to talk about, but hopefully you'll come on another Viewpoint, certainly in September, when Viewpoint returns after the summer break. But there's still several Viewpoints left to go, so please do join us again next week at the same time. Thank you for watching. Good night.